all referenda are binary, yes, no. So yes, there's going to be Brexit. There should be Brexit, since this is what the majority decided. But what kind of Brexit? Nobody even had a debate about.
I heard a young man speaking about Brexit during the campaign before the referendum on Question Time, and I remember this because it really struck me as something that I recognise in many voters. He said, we don't need the EU, we have the Commonwealth. They love our Queen, they are there to serve us. If we leave the EU, we will be able to trade with them and we won't need Europe as much. And it was very much a relationship of subservience in his mind, that these people are loyal to the Queen, they're willing to provide their resources at some kind of discounted rate, and Britain will retain this greatness in the world.
I'm from New Zealand, and some of this talk sounds quite strange to our ears. The Commonwealth has, of course, existed since the Empire ended, but really this idea of reviving it, particularly in a kind of very selective form, seems to work a lot more for British interests than perhaps it does for many of us in the rest of the Commonwealth.
People have had enough of a certain sort of expertise. That is to say, experts tend to deal in aggregate numbers. Migration is good for the economy. Leaving the EU will hurt the economy. And because this is quite a divided country, what you find if you go outside the southeast is people will say, well, actually, that doesn't apply to us. GDP is growing because London's getting richer. My standard of living is dropping. People increasingly feel that experts, or if you like, the establishment, aren't lying necessarily, but are talking about things that don't matter.
We're not getting the conversation that we should be having in this country with the media, because they're not interested in people's lives. I would ask anyone that's worried about immigration, who has been responsible for the decisions that have been made over your head, period. Because I wouldn't choose to blame someone who has very little power compared to someone who has a lot of power in this country.
I adhere to the nostrum that whereas you do have to respect the legitimacy of the vote, equally my democratic obligation and duty is to reject the argument on the basis that, very far from being treacherous, a saboteur or a traitor, that you genuinely believe this is catastrophic in every sense for this country.
I think the political economy of the UK has to be redone from the moment we leave the European Union. There's lots to talk about, and that's a conversation that should include leavers and remainers, people from both sides of the political spectrum, and crucially young and old. And I'd like this convention to be the start of a conversation that includes as broad a cross-section of society as possible.
I would hope that, like, people that never had walked into like a political space before would come to this convention. So that's, you know, young, like working class people primarily.
The ones you should come to hear, I think, are the nurses and the doctors and the scientists, the community workers, the teachers, those voices who were drowned by the rhetoric of the referendum.
For me so far, this election has been pretty narrow and limited. We aren't having the conversation that we need and deserve as a country. You can blame politicians for that, you can blame big media, but I think essentially the convention is a chance for people to come together and start thinking about how we do things differently.